"Don't be too jealous," she said, while curling her lashes in the reflection of the microwave door. She didn't even look at me. Not once. Just stood there in my old college hoodie, the one I couldn't find for 3 weeks, paired with black tights and boots I didn't recognize. Her perfume smelled different too. Sharper. Like something expensive and reckless. She said it the same way you'd tell someone you're going to the store. Matter of fact. Mechanical. Like this wasn't the first time. And maybe it wasn't. The funny part is, I didn't even ask where she was going. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the cereal bowl she left in the sink, the soggy flakes melting into each other like everything else around here. She grabbed her coat, slid her phone into the inside pocket, not the outer one. Too easy to see notifications there, and paused at the door. "I won't be late," she added, like it mattered. Then the door shut. Click. Silence. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about me anymore. Not tonight. Not lately. Maybe not ever. The weird part, I wasn't even mad. Not yet. I just stood there, surrounded by the leftovers of our marriage, half-burned candles, our wedding photo crooked on the wall, her favorite mug on the table, the one she never lets me use because I hold it wrong. So I did what any emotionally unstable man with an anxiety disorder and too much time on his hands would do. I followed the sound of the car engine. Not to spy, not to stop her, just to know. And what I saw, where she went, who she met, and what happened next. That's where things stopped making sense. I shouldn't have done it. I know that. I'm not proud of it. But there's something about silence after betrayal that makes you irrational. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It whispers things like, you have the right to know, and it's only once, and you're not crazy if you can prove it. That's the one that got me. Prove it. As if I needed evidence to validate the sinking in my chest. So I threw on my jacket, still damp from the night before when I went out to clear my head after she said she forgot our anniversary, and stepped into the driveway just as her taillights turned the corner. I didn't even lock the door. I just got in my car and followed from a distance. Headlights off, like some budget detective in a used Prius with more dog hair than dignity. She drove west, past the neighborhood cafes, past the park where we once talked about baby names, and kept going. 30 minutes later, we were deep in an area I'd only been once. An industrial zone turned trendy with wine bars and art galleries in buildings that used to hold forklifts and asbestos. She pulled into a small parking lot outside what looked like a private club. No signs, just frosted glass and valet parking. She got out, handed the keys to some guy who didn't even blink, and walked in without a second thought. But here's where it gets strange. I didn't see a man waiting for her. I saw two. They were already inside, standing near the entrance like they belonged there. One of them waved. She smiled. Not the half-hearted smile I'd grown used to. This was teeth, eyes, shoulders raised. The kind of smile I hadn't seen on her face in 2 years. She hugged the first guy, kissed the second on the cheek. Not romantic, but not casual, either. Like it wasn't new. And I just sat there, in my car, with my stomach in knots, wishing I'd stayed home. Wishing she'd at least had the decency to cheat in the way I understood. Because this wasn't some reckless affair with a co-worker from the annual retreat. This looked organized, planned, routine. She disappeared inside with them, and I was left with a million questions clawing at my ribs. I couldn't follow. I didn't have a suit, a reservation, or the spine. So I waited. For hours. My phone battery drained while I scrolled through old texts from her, trying to pinpoint when it all went dark. 11:47 p.m. That's when she walked out. Alone. Her hair was a little messier. She had a napkin in her hand with what looked like a phone number written on it. But she tore it in half and tossed it in a trash bin by the curb before the valet brought her car around. She didn't look happy, or guilty, or sad. She just looked done. Like something had ended. Like something else had started. I ducked, watched her pull away, waited until the street was empty. Then I did something even worse. I got out of the car, walked up to that trash bin, and dug out the napkin. It wasn't a number. It was a name. And I recognized it. But not from her phone. From mine. The name on the napkin was written in blue ink, sloppy cursive, almost like it had been scribbled down in a hurry. But it stopped my breath cold. Theo W. It wasn't just familiar. It was buried somewhere deep inside my life like a landmine I thought I'd never step on again. And yet, there it was, coated in coffee stains, torn in half, and freshly thrown away by my wife, as casually as if it meant nothing. But to me, it meant everything. Theo Westcott was a friend I hadn't spoken to in almost 5 years. Former friend, technically. He was the guy who used to crash on my couch during college breakups. The guy who once got me arrested because he thought borrowing a golf cart on campus at midnight would be good for morale. The kind of friend you loved but always had to apologize for. Until I stopped apologizing and cut him off. And now, somehow, he was involved in whatever the hell Bryony was doing. I drove home in a fog, the napkin resting on the passenger seat like a cursed artifact. Every red light felt like an interrogation. What was she doing with Theo? Why now? Had they been in contact behind my back? Were the other two men at the club people I once knew too? Or was this something even worse, something deliberate? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, refreshing his ancient Instagram profile that hadn't been updated in years, digging through my inbox for any trace of him, searching for clues I'd missed. But there was nothing. It was like he'd ghosted the world, and then suddenly reappeared in my wife's orbit. At 3:18 a.m., I opened her laptop. I know, I'm that guy now. The one who invades privacy because his spine is made of pudding and jealousy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening here. Something she wasn't just hiding from me. Something she knew I wouldn't understand. And that's when I found the folder. It wasn't on her desktop. It wasn't even in her documents. It was buried in a hidden directory, like she didn't want anyone, especially me, seeing it. The folder was named Quiet Things. That alone gave me chills. I clicked it open. Inside were screenshots. Dozens of them. Screenshots of text threads between her and names I didn't recognize. Photos of meeting locations, calendar invites marked with coded emojis, even scanned handwritten notes. But what scared me the most were the videos. There were 5 of them. I watched the first one. It was grainy. Security cam footage, maybe. Bryony was standing in what looked like a warehouse, speaking with a group of people seated around a long table. I couldn't hear what was being said, but it looked formal. No one laughed. No one smiled. Bryony was holding some kind of notepad, pointing at a projector screen. And then, clear as day, Theo entered from the left. Older, tired-looking, wearing a scarf and sunglasses indoors, like someone hiding something. He walked straight to her, nodded once, and handed her an envelope. She didn't flinch. She just took it, tucked it into her purse, and continued speaking. My wife. In a secret meeting. With people I didn't know. Accepting envelopes from a man I once called my brother. My mouth went dry. I felt like I was watching a movie I never auditioned for. I kept clicking, opening more files, each one darker than the last. None of it made sense, and yet all of it felt personal. Like I had been sleepwalking through my own marriage while she was living a double life right under my nose. At 4:02 a.m., she came home. I slammed the laptop shut so fast it nearly broke. I pretended to be asleep on the couch, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. She didn't say a word. She walked past me, into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, then stood in the dark, staring at nothing. And then she whispered, barely audible, but I heard it. I didn't want you to know. Not angrily. Not fearfully. Just tired. Like she'd lost something. Like she'd already said goodbye. She didn't know I was awake. She still doesn't. And I haven't asked her anything. Because now I don't just want answers. I want to know how long she's been living this life. And if any of it ever included me. The next morning, I watched her make coffee like nothing had happened. She poured oat milk into her mug, stirred it clockwise like she always does, then left the spoon in the sink, right on top of the spoon I had used the night before. Like she wanted to override everything. It was a small detail, and maybe I was reaching, but when you're caught in this weird space between certainty and delusion, everything becomes a symbol. Everything starts to feel like it means something. I asked her how her night was. She blinked twice, then said, "It was quiet," and kissed my forehead on her way to the bedroom. She didn't ask about me. She didn't ask why I was still in yesterday's clothes. I stood there like a mannequin, gripping the kitchen counter to stop my hands from shaking. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But something in me hesitated, not because I didn't want the truth, but because I didn't think I could survive hearing it all at once. Instead, I went back to her laptop. I know. I sound like a stalker. But this wasn't just about suspicion anymore. This was survival. I needed context for whatever the hell I'd seen. The folder was still there. Quiet Things. But this time, I noticed a second folder buried even deeper, labeled Cast List. There were 24 names in that file. Some were just first names, others' full names. Each had a photo attached and a brief paragraph underneath. Notes, like profiles. One said, reliable, fragile, needs external validation. Avoid triggering abandonment themes. Another said, unstable, lasted 3 months, retained no details post-break. And then, I found mine. Elijah M., accountant, loyal, emotionally porous, predictable, strong guilt reflex, attachment-oriented, long-term viability, 5+ years, risk of awareness, low. I couldn't breathe. I read it 4 times, then 5. The words blurred, but that last line cut through like a blade. Risk of awareness, low. I wasn't her husband. I was a variable, an experiment, a role, chosen, measured, tracked. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might tear out of my chest and land right there on her stupid mid-century coffee table. I clicked through more names. Most of them meant nothing to me. But then I saw Theo again. His profile was flagged. Reinstated for Phase 3. Use limited physical proximity. Avoid referencing 2017 incident. There were even meeting schedules, GPS check-ins, and notes about conversations they'd had, like someone had been transcribing their lives from afar. And then I realized the profile documents weren't just about emotional compatibility. They were test logs. Bryony wasn't just cheating. She was studying. I had so many questions and 0 answers. Who was running this? Was she part of it? A pawn? A leader? Was I being manipulated by some psychological think tank? A cult? A performance art collective with a budget? That night, I watched her while she slept. She looked peaceful, comfortable, like she didn't have folders full of human data hiding on her MacBook, like she hadn't surgically removed my sense of self with post-it notes and spreadsheets. I wanted to wake her, to scream, but I didn't, because part of me still believed in the version of her that used to cry during sad documentaries and dance to Sufjan Stevens in our socks on rainy afternoons. But that version of her might have just been another phase, another mask, another tactic. So instead, I made a plan. I was going to message Theo. Not from my number, not from my email, from a fresh account. I needed to know what Phase 3 was. I needed to know why she flagged me as low risk. And I needed to know what happened in 2017 badly enough to risk whatever fallout was waiting on the other side. The next day, I sent the message. 5 minutes later, I got a reply. If you're reading this, she already knows. I stared at the message for at least 10 minutes without blinking. My thumb hovered over the screen like I was afraid it would explode if I touched it again. If you're reading this, she already knows. It was from an account with no profile picture, no name, and a handle that looked randomly generated, just a string of numbers and underscores, like someone created it seconds before replying. I wanted to believe it wasn't Theo, that maybe it was some kind of spam bot, or I'd clicked the wrong contact. But deep down I knew. The timing was too precise. The message was too specific. And besides, only Theo would reply with something that cryptic and chilling. He'd always had a flair for dramatic timing. But this felt more like a warning than a conversation. I locked my phone and looked up. The room felt smaller, like the walls had crept inward without me noticing. The blinds were closed, but suddenly I wasn't sure if I had closed them myself or if they'd already been that way when I got home. Every noise from the street outside felt like it was meant for me. A passing car, a creak from the pipes, the wind brushing the side of the house. It all suddenly seemed staged. For the first time, I genuinely wondered, am I safe? And then, even worse, was I ever? I knew I needed to talk to someone, anyone. But who do you call when the person who's supposed to love you might be orchestrating your emotional dissection like a lab experiment? I couldn't call my brother. He'd always liked Bryony more than me. I couldn't tell my coworkers. I barely speak to them unless it's about spreadsheets or toner. And therapy? I'm already on a 2-month waiting list. So I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I drove to my old apartment building, the one I lived in before I met Bryony. I parked outside and just sat there, staring at the chipped brick and rusted railing, trying to remember who I was before all this. Back then, I had opinions. I had friends who made fun of my music taste and borrowed my jackets and dragged me to dumb indie films that didn't even have endings. I used to feel like a person. Lately, I've just felt like furniture, something in the background of my own life. I don't know what I was hoping to find there. Maybe some proof that this version of reality wasn't the only one. But instead, I found something much worse. My name was on the buzzer. Still, after all these years, I hadn't lived there in nearly a decade, But there it was, Elijah, in faded Sharpie on the old call box. I got out and walked up to it, thinking maybe it was just never removed. But when I pressed the button, I heard a faint buzz inside. And someone picked up. A voice I didn't recognize answered. Calm, measured, almost robotic. You shouldn't be here. I froze. Who is this? I asked. Silence. Then, go home, Elijah. You're late. Late for what? I backed away from the door like it had growled at me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. I got in the car and peeled out of that parking lot like the place was on fire. When I got home, everything looked the same. Too same. The lights were on. The TV was playing some slow jazz station Bryony never listens to. A single glass of wine sat untouched on the coffee table. Her purse was in its usual spot, but her shoes were missing. And on the kitchen table, a photo. It was me, from earlier that day, sitting in my car outside the old apartment, taken from the driver's side window. There was no note, no message, just the photo. Printed, centered on a white sheet of paper. Like someone wanted me to know they were close, but not too close. That I was being watched. Tracked. Mapped. By who? Her? Theo? Someone else? The walls of my life were paper thin now, and whatever was on the other side was beginning to tear straight through. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair across from the photo for hours, staring at it like it might rearrange itself, like the truth might bubble to the surface if I just waited long enough. But nothing changed. It was still my face, still my car, still proof that I wasn't just being watched, I was being handled, managed. Every paranoid instinct I'd ignored for years now sounded like prophecy. Bryony came home just before dawn. The door unlocked with its usual soft click, and she entered with the same casual stride she used after yoga class or brunch with coworkers. She looked at me, then at the photo. She didn't gasp. She didn't lie. She didn't ask me where I got it. She just set her keys down, walked into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water like we weren't standing on the edge of some unraveling, unspeakable secret. I know what you've seen, she said, without turning around. Her voice was calm, exhausted, but not surprised, like she'd been rehearsing this moment for a long time. I couldn't speak. My throat had dried out during the hours of waiting and watching. All I managed was a whisper. Why? She finally turned to face me. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. More like she hadn't blinked in hours. She sat across from me at the table and folded her hands like we were about to negotiate a divorce settlement, or a confession, or a crime scene report. I never wanted you involved, she began. You weren't supposed to intersect with this. Intersect with what? I asked. My voice cracked like it didn't want to carry the weight of the question. She stared at the photo on the table, then picked it up and held it in both hands like it was delicate. I was part of something before you, she said slowly, carefully. Before us. Something I left. Or thought I did. But it's not the kind of thing you get to walk away from. They don't let people walk. My heart slammed so hard against my chest I thought it might crack a rib. You're not making any sense, I said, even though a part of me already understood. Not the details, but the shape of it. The architecture of secrets. They call it the Reflection Project, she continued. At least, that's what they called it when I was recruited. It's not government. Not corporate. It's something in between. Something older. Private. They study behavioral thresholds, emotional thresholds, human loyalty, attachment, risk. Everyone in the program is paired with a subject. A relationship. A marriage, if the match is long-term viable. That was you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, demand she take it back. But I just sat there, frozen, hollowed out. She went on. They monitor everything. Not just our conversations, but decisions. How you react to stress, rejection, suspicion. They build models off of it. Sell them. To security firms. To developers. To anyone who wants to predict human behavior in high-pressure environments. And you just what? Used me? I said. My voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from rage climbing up my spine like fire. I didn't expect to care, she said, her voice quieter now. But I did. You weren't supposed to be anything more than a profile. But then you started writing music again. You cried during that documentary about bees. You painted the bathroom because I mentioned I missed the color of my grandmother's house. You weren't like the others. I stood up. There were others? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was an ocean, and I was already drowning in it. Why now? I demanded. Why let me find it? Why not just keep lying? Her eyes finally met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw, real, broken. Because they're done, she said. They've pulled out of the trial. Everyone's being erased. And I needed you to know before they decide you're a variable that shouldn't be left unobserved. That word again. Variable. I'm not a goddamn lab rat, I muttered. But she looked at me like she wasn't so sure. That's when she handed me a phone. Not hers. Not mine. A burner. Flip style. No apps. One number saved. They'll contact you, she said. You need to answer when they do. If you don't, they'll come in person. And you won't like how they handle it. I wanted to throw the phone into the fireplace. I wanted to run until my legs collapsed. But instead, I took it and put it in my pocket, like I was accepting the terms and conditions of my own unraveling. Bryony walked upstairs. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just paused halfway up the steps and said, "Whatever happens next, I did love you. I just didn't expect you to make it this far." The house was quiet again, and the phone started ringing. The ringtone wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't synthetic or musical. It sounded like static with rhythm, like a broken radio broadcasting Morse code underwater. I stared at the flip phone, still sitting on the table where Bryony had left it. It rang again, and again. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to feed whatever machine I'd been shoved into. But something in me knew this wasn't optional. This was initiation. I answered on the fifth ring. I didn't say anything. Neither did the voice, at first. Just breathing. Calm, deliberate breathing. Then, a male voice, soft but sharp, the kind you can't place an age on. Not young. Not old. Just precise. Elijah Martin. Born June 2nd, 1986. Allergic to soy. Abandoned a guitar scholarship to stay close to your mother. You check the front door lock 3 times before bed and still never feel safe. You've considered jumping in front of a train 3 separate times, but only once while sober. I felt my knees go weak. I sat down slowly, the phone glued to my ear. "Who are you?" I asked, but I knew they weren't going to answer that directly. "You've been a successful subject," the voice continued. "High emotional retention, strong empathy matrix, resistant to dissociation under sustained psychological pressure. And you've displayed higher than predicted cognitive flexibility, given your baseline trauma profile. That last part, that's why you're still alive." I don't remember deciding to cry. The tears just came, quietly, without warning. My brain was still trying to catch up, still stuck on the phrase baseline trauma profile. What did that even mean? How long had they been watching me? Was I born into this? "You're not in danger," the voice said. "Unless you resist." Resist what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Adaptation. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "What the hell do you want from me?" There was a pause. I imagined the person on the other end looking at a screen, maybe running a script or typing notes as I spoke. Then the voice said, "We'd like to make you an offer." I laughed. It was dry, bitter, and involuntary. An offer? "You destroy my marriage, ruin my sense of reality, and turn my life into a lab experiment. And now you want to negotiate?" "You were never married, Elijah," the voice said, not cruelly, but clinically. Bryony was embedded. "You were placed. You signed the consent form on June 14th, 2017. You just don't remember." I stopped breathing. June 14th, 2017. That was the date of my accident. I'd fallen off a short hiking trail, hit my head on a rock, and blacked out. I woke up in the ER with a mild concussion and 2 stitches in my temple. They said I was lucky. Bryony was already in my life by then, already helping me recover, already putting the pieces back together. But now I couldn't stop wondering, what if she was the one who scattered them in the first place? "You're lying," I whispered. "Do you remember what you were doing that morning?" the voice asked. "Where you were going? Who you spoke to? Do you remember the name of the trail?" I didn't. I couldn't. The voice continued. "We don't expect gratitude, Elijah. But understand, this wasn't punishment. You were selected because you were deteriorating. And we provided context, structure, narrative, a life." My mind was spinning so fast I thought I might faint. My skin felt too tight. My teeth hurt. I wanted to scream, but couldn't find the breath. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me now?" "Because the cycle ends in 72 hours, the voice replied. "You've reached the edge of your simulation window. Your file will be closed. But based on your resilience, we're prepared to offer you a different kind of role. The word simulation hit me like a car crash in slow motion. I couldn't even ask what they meant. I just sat there, the phone burning hot against my ear, as the voice told me what they wanted me to become next, what the next cycle looked like, what they needed from someone like me, someone who'd been broken and rebuilt so many times that even reality couldn't find the seams anymore. And the worst part? A part of me was curious. A part of me wanted to know how deep it went, how far it stretched. Because if all this was a lie, maybe becoming part of the lie was the only way to survive it. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I just remember the silence afterward. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that wraps you in safety. It was the kind that follows a car crash, the ringing in your ears kind. The kind that asks, did that really just happen? The offer was simple, complete integration. A new role, a new assignment, full disclosure. No more pretending. No more testing. I would become like Bryony, an architect, as they called it. Someone who lives inside other people's stories, guiding them, pushing them, pulling them apart if needed. No more confusion. No more being the experiment. I would become the observer, the manipulator, the god in someone else's false reality. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. Not anymore. Fear had been replaced with something worse, temptation. They had promised purpose, control, identity. Things I hadn't felt in years. But then I thought about that version of me who once sang in dive bars, badly, and wrote terrible poems about rain. I thought about the Elijah who used to bring soup to sick friends and adopt stray cats, and walk 2 miles just to buy a stupid anniversary candle. I thought about the version of me that hadn't been turned inside out by deception. And I realized something. They didn't create me. They didn't build this resilience they were so obsessed with. I did. I became this strong because of what I endured, not because they designed it. They had mistaken my survival for compliance. And that's when everything clicked. The next morning, I packed a single bag, clothes, my old acoustic guitar, a few printed photos from before Bryony, and the notebook I hadn't written in since 2018. I left the burner phone on the kitchen table, still powered on, still connected. I wanted them to see me leave. I wanted them to know that I was rejecting their offer on purpose. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I drove north. Took the long roads. No GPS. No destinations. Just landscapes I hadn't ruined yet. Every hour that passed, I felt less like a lab rat and more like a person again. By the 3rd day, I reached a small lakeside town with no Wi-Fi and a population that didn't care who I was. I rented a room above a bakery. The kind of place that smelled like vanilla and burnt sugar and second chances. I started playing open mics again. Quiet ones. No expectations. Just sound. I found a stray dog with one eye and named him Alto. I started talking to people again, not because I needed to decode them, but because I wanted to. I even called my mom, really talked to her. It had been too long. Most importantly, I wrote. Every night. About Bryony. About the project. About the breakdowns and the rebuilds and the days I thought I'd lose my mind. I wrote it all down, not for revenge. Not for answers. But to remember that I had survived it. One night, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper that said, "You were never meant to make it out. That's why you did." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Not a bitter laugh. A real one. That's when I knew I was free. I'm still not sure what the reflection project really was. Maybe I never will be. But I've stopped looking over my shoulder. If they're still watching, let them. I hope they're learning something real this time. Because I did. I learned that even if your world turns out to be a lie, your choices are still real. Your love is still real. Your pain, your growth, your humanity, that's yours. No one gets to take that. And me? I chose to live.